Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
Tiffany Chung is ambitious. She's unconventional and she constantly pushes boundaries. And her iconic cartographic work is making swift headway on the international art scene.
Tiffany's maps are not just straightforward maps. I would actually say they are more of palimpsests because they collapse different periods in time, they collapse histories, they collapse memories and testimonies from people.
It's not just about presenting something that's visually beautiful, but it's something that's so much more profound, and I think that speaks very, very highly about her as an artist.
I would describe Tiffany Chung's work as an innovative mix of creativity, playfulness, and at the same time extremely serious engagement with complex issues.
I think Tiffany will be remembered as an artist with an enormous social conscience and someone who's really been able to capture some of the most significant experiences of our time.
Tiffany's work spans across many mediums, from films to sculptures, choreography to cartography, and from photos to architecture. She is not your ordinary artist.
I'm not sure if all artists are expected to delve into history. I'm so interested in history and politics. And I'm interested in the kind of imposed political borders and the impact of that on certain groups of the population. And I'm really interested in investigating into certain histories that are totally erased into oblivion.
Tiffany's experience as a Vietnamese refugee has shaped the theme that runs throughout her work, the stories of the forgotten. She's a contemporary artist that explicitly deals with current political issues, but always in a subtle and indirect way.
The way she draws on her own history is really about a sense of empathy with other people's experience. And it's not about representing her own story, it's about trying to link to, millions of people's stories.
Tiffany's family immigrated to the US after the Vietnam War, where she did a Master's of Fine Art in the University of California, Santa Barbara. She moved to Japan before coming back to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, in 2007. It was during her stay in Japan that Tiffany found the stimulus for a signature film project inspired by the historic events in 1918, when mass uprisings known as the Komesodo, or rice riots, spread throughout Japan. The struggle to fight for their rights was something that resonated with Tiffany.
Mà quý vị biết sao mà cái thời mà vừa giải phóng xong phải mềm nhiều, dễ, cho nên về giải phóng về có dư đương về tiếp.
Còn như tôi là người dân bình thường.
Post-war Vietnam has gone through a similar period of rice shortages, or should I say everything was shortage. We did not have enough rice, we did not have enough anything. So basically, reading about Komesodo just kind of brought back, the memories of that period in Vietnam.
In her film Wellside Gatherings, she interweaves the two histories, the Vietnam rice shortages and the Komesodo riots in Japan, into one mesmerizing performance.
I decided to work with dancers because I just did not know how else I could kind of recapture this kind of struggle and also the spirit, kind of living through this period again.
She's always trying to connect the dots, around the world, because, everything is connected.
This film was later developed into a theatre performance in Vietnam titled Chronicles of a Soundless Dream.
I could feel the tension in the audience. I used this most iconic object during the subsidized period in Vietnam, which was a brick. The dancers would struggle would fighting each other, using the bricks to mark their spots in line and doing all these moves that for the Vietnamese people that have lived through this period, they knew exactly what I was referring to.
The widespread poverty and hunger led to a changing political climate in Vietnam. Tiffany's first solo exhibition in New York City explores this gradual shift from a communist economy to a more open market.
In Vietnam, there are serious restrictions on artistic expression, and especially when it touches on political theme. The advantage to some of Tiffany's work, I think, is that it has this playful aspect and this playful element.
She was collapsing that history of socialist realism and communism in Vietnam with this very consumerist, kind of Americanized present.
That body of work was very much rooted in kind of the influence that she had when she did some research in Japan with Japanese pop culture, and then coming back to Vietnam and engaging with the youth here.
You have all these kind of fluffy objects. And to me, those things are just hilarious, like, you know, because it takes like a kind of super serious attempt and just like pokes fun at it.
After the break, we visit Tiffany's controversial work on urban transformations. We take a look at her sculptures and we learn about her archaeological techniques.
Ideas. Ideas.
The Vietnamese-born, US-educated Tiffany Chung is making swift headway on the international art scene. Her subtle, rebellious streak and wide range of self-expression is what makes her art so unique. As one of the leading artists of her generation, Tiffany is deeply affected by the breakneck transformation of urban landscapes across the world. Similar to her work Play, these three-dimensional sculptures use the same colourful and playful techniques.
I was looking at post-war development in Japan with the culture of cuteness. Everything is so colorful, everything is Hello Kitty. And think about the transformation between a very traditional society to a modern society, and try to link that to what's going on in Vietnam. Sidewalk cafes is like a unique characteristic of Vietnamese street culture. And now, you know, in the name of progress, we are marching towards the future. We're reaching the stars. So that's where the name came from.
But in her later film work, Tiffany's investigation on urban transformation becomes more dystopian as she explores the collapse of modern society and the end of the human race. Her cinematic essay explores the aging population and the decline of industrial towns in Yamaguchi, now rendered obsolete in Japan's post-industrial society. Her work combines fiction and documentary, blends interviews and academic studies, and took 1.5 years to research.
I saw a lot of abandoned houses. It's a very big phenomenon in Japan when you see the decline of small villages where all the old people are left and all the houses are left to be rotten. We traveled to all these little villages, walked from house to house, and then you don't even see any people, to the point that you almost have to check the electric meter to make sure if people still live there or the houses have already been abandoned.
Tiffany's use of film is a way of inserting a sense of time into her work. I mean, they're quite static in a sense, whereas film obviously gives her a sense of movement that she can use to really express that sense of people moving through space.
Tiffany revisits the theme again in 2013 in her exhibition, An Archaeology Project for Future Remembrance, displayed in Ho Chi Minh City. The exhibition remembers Tu Tiem, a small historic town where people had lived since the 17th century, that is being cleared to accommodate a new development project.
You wonder what really happened to the place, what happened to the people, where have they gone? You know, all these questions in my head. This town was established, I believe, at the same time Saigon was founded in 1698. So along this road, years ago, you would see houses, you would see people hanging out on the street. People would be sitting on the sidewalk by the riverbank. I used to see them playing cards, drinking coffee, chatting, playing chess. Chú cái này là hồi trước là Ủy ban Nhân dân phải không? I went there in 2010, and what I saw was really bizarre. I've seen people living in the rubble. People demolished their own houses. It was really intense. So I couldn't really follow the project. It was just too much. So I came back in 2013, wanting to know what was happening. And by that time, I saw no people.
The people who once played cards and chess by the river, whose homes were reduced to rubble, still remain at Thu Tiem's temporary shelter.
Hồi chú là ở đây 13 năm. Căn này.
To preserve the histories of Thu Tiem's residents, Tiffany's idea was not to wait, but to do the excavation now ahead of time, so their stories would not get buried and forgotten under the new development plans.
It's really quite dramatic if you know the history of the displacement and you know the degree to which people are already erasing that history. And that's what archaeologists do, right? They go out and they find lost civilization.
I decided to go across the road and excavate somebody else's home. I asked an evicted resident that I know to work with me on that, and I brought him and his assistant back into the site to start digging.
She's promoted this idea of research, having this anthropological approach, really digging through those histories.
Tiffany preserves the Thu Tiem story with her excavations, along with a 3-channel video.
When the audience came to see the exhibition, they were incredibly intrigued by these very unusual objects in a gallery setting.
That concrete slab is freighted with memories of lives, of feet that have actually once walked across them, tables and chairs dragged across its surface for family dinners. And the fact that it's presented in a quite sterile atmosphere just makes us realize how much we are losing when we indiscriminately develop.
An archaeology project for future remembrance preserves ancient traditions buried under modernisation and remembers the lives of the forgotten. Coming up next, we reveal Tiffany's most renowned work, her cartographic pieces, which are undeniably shaking up the contemporary art world. And we see her most recent work, which was exhibited at the Venice Biennale.
Ideas. Ideas.
For the past decade, Tiffany Chung has continued to defy convention. She's an ambitious artist and is determined to raise awareness about issues like injustice, displacement, and refugees. Tiffany's interest in these global concerns has been shaped by the story of her country's war and her own father's experience. He was a helicopter pilot from the South Vietnamese army, imprisoned for 14 years during and after the war.
It's really difficult to talk about it, especially when your family is affected by it directly. You are just too close to it. So I waited years and years in order to be able to discuss it with objectivity.
In 2014, as part of her work titled Finding One's Shadow in Ruins and Rubbles, Tiffany finally touches upon the subject of the Vietnam War. The exhibition includes 2 videos that recreate her father's takeoffs and landings. One of these films shows her driving down Quan Lo, now an abandoned airfield.
There's undercurrent, I guess, with all of her works is this sense of trying to represent some kind of historical trauma.
To revisit these memories and histories, Tiffany looks at maps. She incorporates new information based on her research, using embroidery and beadwork on canvases or oil and ink on paper.
I have made so many maps of different conflicts, of different areas, different cities, different countries in the world, and I'm very interested in countries that were traumatized by war or natural disasters.
She's able to, by using a map which is supposedly an objective image, but to ingest some humanity into it.
Tiffany also created some maps to trace her father's footsteps. 7 of these maps are titled Lam Son 719 and are presented within a 12-metre-long war diagram depicting the critical events of the war.
In 1971, my father, who was a helicopter pilot, was shot down in Laos. He participated in Operation Lam Son 719. So this diagram also includes like archival photos and different video footage, and all of which explore or investigate the Vietnam conflict for the first time for me personally. And a big part of it is being understood through the lens of my father.
The precision and accuracy of these maps are based on academic studies of the battle, the original layout of the operation, and in 2003, her own field visits to retrace her father's route. All this information is compiled into stunning maps.
They are beautifully patterned with all these dots and kind of code, like a legend or a topographical legend of the map. And many times the colors are quite bright and vivid as well. They remind you of cells or organisms. It's a living thing. It's always changing and developing.
In her exhibition, Tiffany presented these maps alongside another work on the ongoing Syrian conflict to remind us that history repeats itself.
The reason that I was so obsessed with the Syrian crisis or the humanitarian crisis was because it bears striking resemblance to the Vietnamese refugee crisis after 1975.
The 40 maps relating to the Syrian conflict were selected for the main exhibition at the 2015 Venice Biennale, titled All the World's Futures.
It was really fascinating to see how dark subjects would borrow from this earlier kind of playful, colorful work, and you can see that thread going through all of the work in a way.
Every map contains a complex system of coding. In this map, the bigger the dot, the larger the number of refugees.
It charts the increasing number of the refugees, of the Syrian refugees from 2012, 2013 to 2014. All the red dots show the Syrian refugees. You will see a lighter colored dots. And these are the numbers of Palestinian refugees that are still in Lebanon since 1948.
In 2012, Tiffany started compiling information for her Syrian project. Each dot on her maps involves immense amounts of research, analysis, and data crunching techniques.
I started by researching for the statistical data. And so I would go through different links, start to read all the information in there and try to extract the data, the numbers, the figures, statistics, everything. I have to check like 10 different sources for the figures and trying to see which figure is more realistic. If there's more sources, use that number versus the other number. You know, it's a lot of work involved. You have to have your facts right so that people would take you seriously.
She's able to combine hard data, historical detail, human experience, and visual beauty in this incredibly kind of complex but very engaging way.
She remaps borders that have been created, changed, or erased based on political decisions and collapses timeframes into these beautiful maps.
I wanted to look into the colonial partitioning of the Middle East with politically constructed borders, just to understand, to unpack this crisis.
The drawing of boundaries a century ago have had a huge impact on how events are unfolding today. So it's really giving a sense that history is always playing out and nothing comes out of nowhere. And the way that she uses maps is to say that this place or this terrain has been contested for many years. It's not a fixed site.
Another feature of the Syrian project is the sculptural component, featuring a series of mahogany wooden light boxes recording the destruction of Syrian cities.
I collected all the photos of the ruins in Aleppo, in Homs, in Damascus, and in other places in Syria. And I ended up creating these kind of light boxes, but the wooden boxes is all handcrafted, referring to the Victorian keepsake boxes.
Combining and overlaying a spectrum of mediums, Tiffany Chung's work is far from simple.
The search is a thorough one. Metal detectors seek out concealed gold or weapons.
In her most recent Vietnamese exodus project, she studies the post-1975 exodus, the largest group of Vietnamese refugees that left the country. The depth and scope of her work surprises us once again.
Layers and layers in so many different things. Like one project covered policy making, cover like living conditions in asylum camps, and then cover the educational aspect of trying to get the young artists here to access to this history. They're really good. They got zero history knowledge, but they got the skills. So how do you get them to learn the history? You just give them photos and say, render this into painting for me.
The unstoppable woman inspires and mentors Vietnam's young artists. And in Denmark, she teaches refugee children her techniques of art. Her life and her art are about creating change.
There's certain limitation in art. You can only take it so far. I really want to push it beyond what people think art is and really tap into the international policy making. I just want to use my work and my research to hopefully demand some changes.
She's an artist with a very expansive vision, an artist who can really work effectively in so many media and is able to grapple with enormous subjects in a very intelligent, very nuanced and very subtle, I guess, way.
She is definitely affecting a new generation of Vietnamese artists, of just the Vietnamese community. I mean, they're seeing that art can really, it can be more than just beautiful.
My work, in a way, is a quiet protest. It's a protest against the politics of memory, the politics of remembering and forgetting. It's a protest against this politically driven historical amnesia. And in order to do that, you know, it gives more of an impact if you do it from within, if that voice comes from within.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.